Yeah, we back. Yeah, we back. Now, today we're going to be talking about Wack 100. So, Wack 100 was on the No Jumper podcast, Adam 22. And for whatever reason, I don't know why, but he was sitting around talking about slavery. I don't know why they talking about slavery on No Jumper. As we already know, No Jumper is not an intellectual podcast. So, I don't know why they were even engaging in this discussion. But anyways, let's get into it. So Wack 100 was on his broadcast with Adam 22 of the No Jumper podcast, and Wack 100 was basically explaining the reason why he believes that slavery was a necessary evil. Like, we had to go through the horrors of slavery in order to, enjoy the luxuries and amenities of life today, in order to, be where we are today. Now, don't ask me what he means by that. I don't know, but I'm going to run the clip and I'm going to give my thoughts on the subject. Let's get into it.
I wouldn't erase slavery. Slavery was needed for the people to be who they are today. Without those people in Africa doing whatever they did with the slave trade and our people coming over here and the things that happened on the plantations, I believe that we were the race that was chosen to go through that because we probably was the only ones that can endure that. You understand what I'm saying? So by our people going through these things, it led to where we're at today. And I hate when people cry about what our people went through because they went through that for us to have the opportunity they have today. They probably in their grave like, what are you crying about? We went through that. We hung for these trees. We did everything that, we went through all of that for you guys to have the opportunity that you have today. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, a lot of it is like, it's kind of like, it's cruel and real dark, but we survived it as a people because we still stand today.
All right, we back. Now, one thing that always bothered me was, now, of course, this is simply a result of miseducation, but one thing that always bothered me was how it seems that we are the only group of people that people just find it so easy to just play with the memory of our ancestors. Like, now, part of it is due to the fact that we do not control our own narrative. The most common and accepted narrative is the one given by the European imperialists, right? And what they do is they minimize the transatlantic slave trade. They minimize what our ancestors went through, or they try to justify it, right? It's either those two. They either minimize it or they try to justify it, right? We even seen it happen recently with DeSantis down in Florida, like in the past year. Take a look up on the screen. It was a whole big fiasco because he came out in the media and said that blacks actually benefited from slavery, right? So similar to what Wack 100 had said, how, slavery, it brought some good things with it. We had to go through the horrors of slavery in order to be where we are today, right? It's similar to what DeSantis had said when he said black folks had benefited from slavery because they learned certain skills. Now, keep in mind, the skills he was talking about was skills that we already had back in Africa, back on the continent. But he said, we benefited because then we could, be a blacksmith now after slavery. It's crazy justifications, right? Even recently, I did a video about a politician in the United Kingdom who said that the former British colonies, they owe a debt of gratitude for being colonized by the British, right? You should be grateful that you were colonized by the British because we brought so many good things. We brought civilization and democracy, right? So these are commonly held beliefs in the Western world that slavery and the overall degradation of the black race actually came with some benefits and some positive aspects that we should be appreciative and grateful for. Now, unfortunately, Wack 100, just like myself, we grew up in the American educational system, right? We have a colonial education. We are given a colonial education. So the same way that the British politician had said that the British colonies owe a debt of gratitude for being colonized by the British, those same exact individuals are the ones that crafted our textbooks, that crafted our curriculums. So it's no surprise that Wack 100, a grown black man who received a colonial education, he's going out into the world talking about how slavery, it's some good things that came out of slavery. Like, that's the product of a colonial miseducation. Now, where do people even get the idea that slavery actually came with some benefits? Well, like I said, when it comes to Western academia, when it comes to receiving a Western education, the most commonly widely accepted narrative is the idea that the European invaders actually came to bring civilization and bring, religion to the uncivilized Negroes.
Some of these Caribbean countries are very prosperous. They've done extremely well. And they did well because the British gave them the rule of law, yes, and democracy and capitalism. And this has been incredibly successful. The British Empire was an amazing force for good, for civilization, and for raising people's standards of living. So why should we have to pay for doing that? Surely we should be paid.
I think that's a very bold question to ask a strong black woman on your channel, Jacob. And I'll actually pose a question to you. Would you say that about Jews? So I'll just give the context. First and foremost, one could easily argue that the Jewish community, the Israeli Jews, benefited from the Holocaust and Hitler. Allow me to finish. Let me bring it home, Jacob. Let me bring it home. They benefited from Holocaust and Hitler due to the fact that they were given the state of Israel. Their life expectancy improved, and last but not least, their GDP improved. Israel's GDP improved as a result of Germany giving reparations in 1952. So would you say on national TV about the Jews that they should be happy and should be thanking Hitler and the Holocaust, Amy and David, for what they have gone through because they have benefited in terms of money? I would argue that Amy and David, Jacob wouldn't say this about Jews, but he's saying it about black people. So let me know what you're saying here, Jacob.
About the whole history of the British colony.
Now, like I said, we've allowed the nonsense to go on for so long where you could have a grown-ass white man look a black woman dead in her face and say, listen, I should be paid. I should be the one getting paid. I should be the one getting compensated for slavery and colonialism. Don't you see the good that I did for you? This is where we are at because we allowed the bullshit to go on for so long. Now, I do admire her for raising a counter argument and asking him, would you say the same exact thing about what the Jewish community went through in those, 10 years of the Holocaust or however long it was, right? And you saw how he got flustered and started stuttering once he raised that argument. He realized how stupid he sounded, right? But that's because, like I said, in our educational systems, we are taught the atrocities of the Holocaust. We are taught the gravity of the Holocaust, right? We know, don't you dare play about the Holocaust, right? We are taught that as young children. But when it comes to our history, our narrative is just left up open to disrespect. We allow our European enemies to teach the history of our people. Their narrative is the one that is accepted as the dominant and the most credible narrative, right? And the reason why the European narrative is seen as the most dominant narrative is because we are only taught the history from the perspective of European writers, from European men who lived during the time period. We don't even read the testimony of black men and women who lived during a certain time period. We don't even acknowledge that in Western academia. And it's not like the books don't exist. It's not like the literature doesn't exist. In fact, I read a book on my channel that came out back in 1814, right? The Colonial System Unveiled, right? That book was published by the government of King Henry Christophe, the King of Haiti, back in 1814, over 200 years ago, where from a first-person perspective, you are listening to the testimonies of those who lived during the colonial period, who lived under French colonial rule, who lived under European colonial rule, under the system of slavery, what they went through on a day-to-day basis. The crimes committed by the French colonists. I'm not going to repeat it here. You can go listen to the book. But I believe that if Wack 100 had read that book, I don't think that he would say that slavery actually came with some benefits. I don't think that he would fix his mouth to say that. And I think the reason he feels comfortable doing that is because he was never taught the real gravity of what our people went through during slavery. I really don't think that he really understands what they really went through. Because if he did, I think he would have more respect for it. And in fact, in that same book that I was talking about that came out in 1814, they had mentioned a French gentleman by the name of Pierre-Victor Malouet. Take a look up on the screen. Now, in that book, it was mentioned, this was the first time, at least the earliest time documented, that this narrative of how, the blacks benefited from slavery actually came about. This was the first European man that I could recall ever making that argument back in the early 1800s, right? This guy actually said that being enslaved as a black man or a black woman is actually a superior existence than being free and having your liberty and autonomy, right? Take a look up on the screen. Pierre-Victor Malouet was a French colonial administrator, a planter, a conservative publicist, and a monarchist politician. Now, when Christophe was in power in the north as the King of Haiti, this man was one of his biggest enemies. Pierre-Victor Malouet, one of the biggest enemies of the black race during the early 1800s, man. This man, he hated the black man. This guy, he absolutely hated the black man. Now, keep in mind, he was one of the French colonists that got ran off the island during the Haitian Revolution. So you already know, yeah, he was mad. Yeah, he was mad. And in fact, if you remember that story I told you about how Christophe had killed the French ambassador, well, the French ambassador was actually sent by that same man, Pierre-Victor Malouet. He was the one that dispatched the French ambassador to go negotiate and have a meeting with Christophe. So, this guy was actually the first individual documented 200 years ago that actually made the argument that slavery was actually a good thing. Now, here's the reality. Here's the facts, right? The lesson that you should take from slavery is not to get on your knees and start, showing gratitude and showing, thanks to the white man for enslaving you. That should not be your first reflex. This is very shameful on Wack 100's part as a black man. Your first reflex should be to examine and reflect on how we even got to that position in the first place, right? So those mistakes never happen again, right? What were the causes? What was the environment like at the time that facilitated for that to happen? Because going back to the Jewish community, that's what they do, right? They study the history with the goal in mind of making sure that it never happens again. Why you think they're over there, blowing the Palestinians away, right? Because they have it ingrained into their mentality that if anybody ever tries to run over us again, we are going to smash on them. If anybody tries to trespass against us, we are going to do the most, right? That is the mentality of the Jewish community, especially the Israelis over there, blowing the Palestinians to shreds. They have a mentality of never forget, and they indoctrinate that into their children from an early age, right? To understand the horrors their forefathers went through and their foremothers went through to make sure that it never happens again. Those atrocities brought them closer together as a people. It unified them even closer together as a people. They were already unified somewhat, but it really fortified the unification extremely. That's why the Jews, man, listen, they ride together. And one of the biggest weaknesses that black men had during the pre-colonial period, especially in West Africa, was the fact that the black man was not unified. And when I talk about unity, I'm not talking about that black men had to, abandon their cultures and civilizations and come under one banner or come under one flag. No, you can still maintain your independence, you can still maintain your sovereignty, but still cooperate with your neighbors, right? On your common foreign policy or based on your common interests. But what black men at the time did not understand is we were too busy focused on looking at each other as rivals or competitors instead of looking at how we could collaborate and come together, especially against common adversaries that were slowly trespassing against us. It was our disunity that facilitated the slave trade. During that time, black men were in an arms race to make sure that my kingdom was the most powerful. My nation had the best technology. My nation had the biggest standing army. My nation was the most prosperous. My kingdom was the most rich. And it was through our competition and our disunity that outsiders were able to exploit that division between us through divide and conquer. And it was through this disunity and competition that led to physical confrontations and military conflicts. And it was through those military conflicts that led to captives being captured and sold into slavery. Another mistake that black men made during that time was the fact that we didn't realize that we actually had way more in common as black men, as African men, than we did with these outsiders coming in from Europe. And because we failed to realize that we were more similar than we were different from each other, and because we looked at each other as rivals or competitors instead of allies, it was this weakness, it was this opening that allowed Europeans to gain a foothold into the continent. And due to the fact that we were too preoccupied with fighting amongst each other for regional supremacy instead of forming coalitions to resist the incoming European incursions, that left us open and vulnerable. Now, of course, these things are not unique to black men, African men. Of course, when you go to every continent, the history of every race, similar things have happened, right? The Europeans have fought amongst each other, the French, the British, the Spanish, the Portuguese, the Dutch, etc., right? The Asians have fought amongst each other, the Battle of Nanking, the Japanese versus the Chinese, etc. And obviously, we can look at World War I and World War II. So obviously, these type of tribal conflicts are not unique to black men, but obviously, the effects of our tribal conflicts have left permanent generational scars. And this might sound controversial, but I understand the mentality of our ancestors who might have been engaged in the slave trade. I understand, right? Because they were a product of their environment. I can understand the bitterness or the hatred that could exist if you grew up in a society and then that other tribe over there, that other nation over there, the other kingdom over there, that, 30 years ago or 100 years ago, they invaded your territory and, slaughtered your people. That anger and the desire for vengeance might still be there. So when you go on a military campaign against them, you might not feel any remorse if you take them into captivity and sell them into slavery. You could take the Dominicans and the Haitians, for example, right? There are some Dominicans that absolutely hate Haitians. And if you ask them the reason why, they'll tell you, back in 1805, back in, 1832, the Haitians did this and the Haitians did that. And they still mad about that 200 years later. There are Haitians who absolutely hate Dominicans because they'll tell you, back in 1937, they slaughtered thousands of our people. And I'm telling you, there are definitely some Dominican extremist nationalists that would definitely sell a Haitian into slavery. And there are definitely some Haitian extremist nationalists that will definitely sell a Dominican into slavery. So I understand how these rivalries and these conflicts could lead to that, right? But the lesson in all of that should not be, thank you, Mr. White Man, for slavery, because without slavery, I wouldn't be here today. No, you shouldn't be getting on your knees to kiss the white man's feet and start booty clapping for the white man and thanking him for slavery. No, the lesson should be to understand the importance of unity, right? Unity and cooperation is non-negotiable because we see, looking at the past, when we were not unified, our disunity led to our downfall. And like I said before, when I talk about unity, I'm not talking about abandoning our cultural identities, abandoning none of that. You can still be who you are as a black man. You can still maintain and embrace your cultural identity, but still understand that as black men around the world, we have a shared identity. We have common interests. We should have a common foreign policy as it relates to geopolitics. We should try our best to move as a united front in the arena of economics, military cooperation, and geopolitics. And this is why I'm always preaching the doctrine of unity, because I understand that it was our disunity that led to our destruction. And when I see, certain black men in the modern day who shall not be named, but that try to, bring back that primitive mindset, that primitive tribal mindset of, oh, I'm not rocking with you because you a black man from over there and I'm a black man from over here. And that's that gangbanger mentality. And it's funny because Wack 100 himself, he's a former gangbanger. He's a former gang member. I think he's like part of the Bloods or whatever. So he would have been back on the continent 400 years ago selling black men and women into slavery, right? Because he's a fucking gangbanger. So he would have been selling us into slavery because these guys be fighting over blocks, be killing you because you from a different block. So he would have been selling slaves. Don't even get me started on guys like Tariq Nasheed, right? Tariq Nasheed claims he used to be a pimp back in the day, right? He used to build women on the street to sell their bodies. So you already know he would have definitely sold us into slavery. Now, another reason why black men must understand that we got to move as a unit and unity is important is because you cannot go against a coalition by yourself, right? You cannot go against a group of individuals by yourself as a solo act, right? For example, geopolitically, the Europeans, they don't move by themselves, right? The United States doesn't move by itself. France doesn't move by itself, right? These colonial nations don't move by themselves. They move as a unit. They move as a united front. Even when they were making incursions into Africa, what do you think the Berlin Conference was? That was white men from different nations all across Europe coming together to sit at the table to understand how we're gonna, defend our economic interests on the African continent. When you think about the Marshall Plan, right, where the United States helped rebuild the European infrastructure and economy after World War II. Even when you think about NATO, right, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, that's a military alliance of Western nations, right? Military cooperation. So I gave you the Berlin Conference and the Marshall Plan. That's economic cooperation. Then you got NATO, military cooperation. And then you got institutions like the IMF and the World Bank. That's also economic cooperation, geopolitical cooperation, diplomatic cooperation. You got the UN Security Council, where the Western nations move as a bloc when it comes to international affairs. And then, of course, you got their immigration policy where, of course, the white immigrants always get, VIP access. They get the red carpet treatment in Western nations, right? The white immigrants just be piling in by the millions and millions in Western nations, right? And nobody says a word, right? So as you can see, our adversaries understand that despite their internal differences, they understand that their collective unity, their collective identity and interests are more important than any petty internal rivalries that they could have at the current moment, right? They don't get bogged down by the fact, the British and the French are not still worried about, the battles they had back in, 1695 and shit like that. They're not still thinking about the old battles from, 1867. No, they're not thinking about that no more. They move as a unit. And you can see how they move as a unit if you remember when the military government in Niger had overthrew the so-called democratic government. You saw European nations all over Europe come together and stand behind France. The entire European Union put sanctions on Niger. Not just France, the whole fucking continent of Europe. Now, of course, they understood, listen, we have common interests because it was the uranium coming out of Niger that I believe was responsible for like 25% of the electricity in Europe or their nuclear reactors or something like that. But a good amount of the uranium coming out of Niger was actually very vital for the interests of the European economy. Not just the French economy, but the overall European economy. So when the so-called democratic government, the so-called democratic puppet got overthrown, the entire European Union moved as a bloc and immediately responded with sanctions. You even had random nations like Germany come out and make statements, right? And I was most surprised because the German foreign minister condemned the coup d'etat in Niger, and she was a woman. Now, of course, you know what they tell us, women empowerment, women got to stick together, women got to stick together. But I remember during that time, I was like, wow. So doesn't she understand that the women of Niger are going to suffer due to the sanctions, the crippling sanctions being placed on the country? So does she not care about the girls and the women that may go hungry because of these sanctions? Oh, they don't care. No, she didn't give a damn, right? It was about protecting European interests. European interests superseded female solidarity, so-called woman solidarity. Do you know that it was many citizens in Niger that died because of those economic sanctions? I'm pretty sure some of them had to be women, probably some elderly women too. So they didn't even give a damn. They didn't give a damn because it was about protecting European economic interests above all. Now, one thing I got to give a shout out to is the fact that the brothers in the Sahel, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, they understood the assignment, right? They understood what I'm talking about when it comes to the importance of unity, because they understand that I cannot stand by myself and go against a coalition of nations. I need some allies. I need my brothers behind me. I need my brothers standing behind me. And as you already know, they created the Alliance of Sahelian States, which is a military defense pact, which means that if you attack any one of these nations, they treat it as if you attacked all three of them, and they respond and move as a unit. And that's what I mean when I talk about unity, right? You don't have to abandon your cultural identity. You don't have to abandon your ancestral identity. You can maintain all of your cultural customs. All we have to do as black men is to cooperate in the arena of economics, politics, and diplomacy, and military cooperation as well. As black men, we have to stop holding grudges against each other, especially because if you forgave the white man for everything he did, then you can find it in your heart to forgive the black man. That's my mentality, right? If you can forgive the white man for doing what he did to your great grandmother, then listen, you can forgive the black man. You listen. I don't think it's a crazy thing for me to say. If you can forgive the Europeans for everything they did, I think you can forgive the black man. I think you can forgive the black man. I don't think that's unreasonable to say. If the French and the British are not currently holding grudges against each other for the 1,000-year history of warfare they have amongst each other, then listen, I think as black men, we can put our differences aside for our common interest and our common good and our common future to build a prosperous future for our people and, see the bigger picture. I don't think what I'm saying is controversial at all. But anyways, back to Wack 100. Unfortunately, this is a black man who received a colonial education, a colonial miseducation, and he's making the wrong analysis, right? He is looking at it and saying, thank you, Mr. White Man, thank you, because through the horrors of slavery, I was able to, be on this podcast and I could, be in America, driving a BMW because of slavery, just stupid shit, bro, just retarded logic, right? When in reality, the analysis he should be giving is the analysis I just gave, which is learning from the mistakes that we made in the past, correcting it for the future, and understanding that our prosperity lies in our unity and cooperation. End of discussion, point blank, period. Also, I forgot to mention something else that gets minimized when we discuss the history of slavery is the fact that we forget that these were actually human beings. These were individuals with their own gifts and talents and their own contributions they could have made to the world. There were many individuals who were born into bondage on a cotton plantation or a sugar plantation or a tobacco plantation that were destined for bigger and better things, right? They were supposed to go on to be a scientist or a great writer, or a philosopher, or a nation builder, or a leader. But instead, they were relegated to living a life in misery and bondage. And they never were able to make their contribution to humanity, right? They lived and died on a plantation and they were forgotten about. Imagine the amount of advancements in science and technology and mathematics that we missed out on because the individual who's supposed to come to earth and deliver those advancements was too busy living in misery on a plantation somewhere instead of contributing to humanity like they should have been doing. And we also forget the fact that the majority of the victims who unfortunately had to suffer under the cruelty of the European colonists were actually children, right? Children were the majority of the victims, whether it was sexual violence or physical violence or outright murder. Children made up the majority of the victims. So to be honest, I cannot really agree with Wack 100 when he says that slavery was a necessary evil for us to be where we are today. I don't think any of that needed to happen, right? I don't think little, 7-year-old girls had to be assaulted so I can be here today, driving a BMW or some stupid crap. I don't see the logic, right? I don't really think that Black women had to be thrown into dungeons and starved to death just so I could be where I am today, right? I don't think black men had to be, executed and, eaten by dogs and sewn into the belly of an ox and buried alive just for me to be where I am today. I really think, folks really have to study the violence and the psychotic behavior of the European colonists before you open your mouth and say that slavery came with any benefits. We have to show respect for those that came before us, man. It got to be some respect at a bare minimum, man. I mean, goddamn, this guy talking about so we could have the opportunities that we have today. Wack 100, you are not a scientist. You are not somebody who's contributing to society in a major way. You manage rappers, right? You're a manager for rappers. Rappers weren't even that talented, to be honest. So you mean to tell me our ancestors went through the horrors of slavery just so you could be a gangbanger and a podcaster and a rap manager? This guy Wack 100 is speaking as if he's making some major contributions to humanity. I mean, bro, you're not doing anything special. You know, you ain't doing much. You ain't doing anything special. But anyways, this is also the reason why I came on YouTube, right? Because I felt like it was too many black men like this, like Wack 100, black men who really shouldn't have a microphone at all. But it was black men like this that was hogging up all the airtime, hogging up the microphones, man. You know, goddamn. But anyways, man, it's your boy Neferkari, that's Celine, back in the Billy, yes indeed. Cash app in the description. Support the album, man. Support the channel. Peace. No. Feel like I'm 75. Know that your team be full of them traders. You know that can never be mine. I'm grabbing a thought when I drive. I'm back in my zone and we young. She said that she ready to come be my wife. Yeah, hoping I don't do her wrong. I gave her my word and it's bond. I'm whipping the best like a lamb. I mean no chicken and lamb. Accustomed to call me the man. I never be up on the gram. I'm keeping that way undercover. She want me to tell her I love her. I told her I'm breaking the rules. I told her we making the news. Back in my city, they loving me. Standing alone, I'm 100 deep. Enemy plotting and still in reach. They try to make sure that we underneath. Trying to make sure that we never make it. Coming for power, come get acquainted. Coming for everything that I wanted. Feeling like Drake, but I really wrote it. Feeling like Kendrick, I'm checking names. Gotta roll up while I go insane. Got so much stress, I've been gaining weight. Stuffing these racks in this Louis case. One thing for certain, I'm about to check. Keep it 100 and nothing less. Stick with the family since day one. Had to stay down till my day come. Had to stay down, but I'm never patient. Hop on the mic and I'm motivated. Hop on the mic and I drop a classic. Haters can't see me, they copping glasses. Back in the studio making magic. Got a new tape and it's in production. Back on my business, I got a budget. Staying low key when I'm out in public. Feel like I'm 75. Know that your team be full of them traders. You know that can never be mine. I'm grabbing a thought when I drive. I'm back in my zone and we young. She said that she ready to come be my wife. Yeah, hoping I don't do her wrong. I gave her my word and it's bond. I'm whipping the best like a lamb. I mean no chicken and lamb. Accustomed to call me the man. I never be up on the gram. I'm keeping that way undercover. She want me to tell her I love her. I told her I'm breaking the rules. I told her we making the news.